Welcome to our 11 a.m. panel on teacher voice in education policy. I'm Stephen Sawchuk. I'm an associate editor at Education Week, the K-12 newspaper of record, where I have the privilege of covering teachers, teacher quality, the teaching profession, and I'm really excited to be here today to moderate this panel. We talk a lot about teacher voice, but I think often we don't get into the specifics. I can tell you my own story about teacher voice. It's interesting being a reporter covering teachers because I'll tell you, most of the people that make policy about teachers aren't teachers, weren't teachers, and frankly, it's even difficult as a reporter sometimes to get teachers in stories about teachers. So think about that for a minute. So I'm really excited to have the panel that I have up here today. I'm particularly excited that we actually have a teacher, fancy that, on a panel about teachers. Woo, let's give Genevieve a hand. So I'm gonna have each of the panelists do a very short introduction, and then we're going to do some sort of longer conversations up here on really kind of broader questions. Then we'll do some shorter lightning round sort of questions, and then we will turn it over to you. And I guess before we get started, can we have people in the back maybe move up a little further, because there's a lot of open seats up here, and then you can hear us better, and we can call on you if you're not engaged, and all of those fun teacher tricks. All right, awesome. Yeah, look at that, they're actually paying attention to me. It's so exciting.
But then you can't interview yourself.
All right, so Sydney, why don't we start introductions with you, and we'll just go down the table.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So excited to be here. This is just such a powerful couple of days, seeing so many brilliant educators under one roof together. So I feel very lucky to be a part of it. My name is Sydney Morris. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Educators for Excellence, which I will tell you a little bit more about later in this conversation. But I'm a native New Yorker. I am a product of New York public schools. And I went to college down in New Orleans at Tulane University. And during my junior year there, the tragic and historic Hurricane Katrina hit and devastated the city, including the public school system. And when I returned to New Orleans, I started volunteering in an elementary school there, where I designed and taught an after-school dance program. And it was there, in perhaps the most extreme of circumstances, that I saw the truly remarkable impact that teachers were having on the kids in that building and changing their trajectories. And I knew that was something that I wanted to be part of. And so I joined Teach for America and was a 2007 core member in New York City. I taught second and third grade in the Bronx in New York at PS 86. And I absolutely loved it, but also grew frustrated with the system I was teaching in, which is what led me to co-found E4E with a number of other teachers, some of whom are here in this room today.
Good morning. My name is Genevieve DeBose. I'm an LA 99 core member. I am a proud National Board certified teacher. I was a teaching ambassador fellow at the U.S. Department of Education 3 or 4 years ago, where I took a break from teaching to actually learn about ed policy and be a teacher, one of the teacher voices at the U.S. Department of Education at the federal level. I left teaching for that year, and then stayed in the policy world for 2 more years, and really missed teaching and kids and colleagues. And so last year I returned to the classroom, and I'm teaching 7th grade English language arts and an 8th grade leadership class at the Bronx Studio School for writers and artists in New York City.
Hi, I'm Alice Johnson-Kane with Teach Plus. I am thrilled to be here. I'm a huge fan of TFA, have been for many years. I was actually graduated the same year as Wendy Kopp, and my biggest beef with TFA is that she didn't found it a few years earlier, so I so it would have been there for me. But I've sort of watched it grow over the years, and I'm a huge fan of what you all do. I've spent about 17 years working in the government. I got into Teacher Voice. I was working for Paul Simon, if anyone's here from Illinois, in the Senate on a law that became known as the National Literacy Act. At the time I was working on that, I was also teaching GED and ESOL classes across town here in DC. And I was the only person working in the Senate who had any experience teaching and teaching in an adult literacy program. And I had a very different perspective on a number of the issues and provisions of the law that were being debated because of what I saw in my students' classroom in the evening. And so that sort of showed me firsthand the importance of having teachers engage in policy. I later worked for George Miller, who some of you may have heard this morning. And when I was working for him, always tried to find teachers to engage in policy, but it was really, really hard. There were not any organizations like Teach Plus, like E4E, like the other Teacher Voice organizations that try to build those connections. So I came to Teach Plus to try to help fill that need. And one little known fact about Teach Plus that may interest you, our first office in Boston was actually in the TFA headquarters there. And TFA was kind enough to give us 3 cubicles where many dreams were dreamed and visions were had that over the past 5 years we are trying to bring to fruition. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Maddie Fennell. I am more of a traditional educator, I suppose you'd say. This is my 26th year as a teacher in the Omaha Public Schools. I've taught 1st, 6th, and 4th grade. I've worked 2 years as a literacy coach. I was honored in 2007 as the Nebraska Teacher of the Year. I'm a National Board Certified Teacher. And this year, I'm serving as a teacher leader in residence at the U.S. Department of Education. I did what Genevieve did a few years ago, and I was a Classroom Teaching Ambassador Fellow. I felt that the more teachers actually involved in developing policy, we could perhaps bridge the implementation gap, which is the gap between when policy is passed and it lands in your classroom. And so I wanted to be a part of that and learn to speak policy, because I think it's kind of like learning to speak Spanish. I know just enough to go to the bathroom. I know just enough policy to try to figure it out. And so I wanted to learn more so I could really help that interpretation. So I came as a Classroom Teaching Ambassador Fellow, and then we started this new thing called Teach to Lead, which is an effort between the department and ASCD and the National Board and 115 other organizations to allow teachers to lead from the classroom. As someone tweeted this morning, there is more education knowledge in a teacher's pinky than in a policymaker's whole body. Sorry, Alice. So we need to be involved in that conversation. So Teach to Lead is about how we help teachers lead while staying in the classroom. I was so excited about that I actually wrote a note to Arnie and said, I think that I should stick around. Will you let me stay? And so last year I was in a hybrid role. So I was a half-time literacy coach and half-time at the department. I was on the road 127 nights. My husband threatened to make me get a passport to come through the door. So I made a very difficult decision for me, which was to leave a school. And I still have teacher dreams every week because it's really hard for me to be away from that. Kids are my crack, and I really need to be around them to be really happy. So, so that's kind of, and now you know I'm also very inappropriate when on panels, so I'm really surprised they let me come back.
My favorite. I'm the panelist.
Kids are my crack. Somebody needs to
Oh, and I
that.
tweet at Maddie F. I'm at Maddie F when I tweet, so feel free to follow me on Twitter.
And by the way, we encourage you all to tweet the session too, and I think the hashtag.
Except not what I say inappropriate. but
Except for
otherwise.
everything that she says, it's inappropriate. So anyway, hashtag TFA25, I believe, is what we've been using. So I'm going to start with my first question. And by the way, if I hold the paper really close to my eyes, it's because my computer in its infinite wisdom printed it out in like 8-point type, and I'm like old and going blind. So I'm like, Anyway, so first question. I think we want to define a little bit about what we mean when we say teacher voice. Well, what do I mean by this? Well, sometimes like when I bring this up when I'm reporting, people will say, well, teachers have a voice. They have their union, they have their association, they have National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, they have National Council of Teachers of English, they have their other professional networks. So when we talk about this, why are current avenues through which teachers are making their voices heard insufficient, or maybe not all of the avenues that we need? And also, you've worked at different levels of government, federal, and influencing state policies. So, like, which level, federal, state, local, do you think is most in need of teacher feedback? We can start wherever you guys want to start. Don't all fight for the mics.
I'll kick it off. So first of all, I think, like, why are there so many channels? Why are maybe the channels that previously existed not sufficient? You know, I think if anybody ever told a parent, well, the only place that you should go to have your voice heard is the PTA, we would all, you know, fall down, right, in shock, because the point is that teachers, parents, community members, students, everybody who touches education should have a multitude of ways to ensure that their voices and ideas are heard. I mentioned before that I absolutely loved teaching, but I also found myself growing very, very quickly frustrated with the system that I was teaching in. And I started talking with other teachers at my school and at other schools, and quickly found that they too shared a lot of similar frustrations. And although we talked about different specific issues that concerned us, overwhelmingly what I heard over and over again was this concept of, gosh, and I just feel like I don't have any voice in any of the decisions that are made, all of which impact me as a professional and, more importantly, impact my students. And in my third year of teaching in 2010, there was a big union election in New York City for the president of the United Federation of Teachers. It's the largest local teachers union in the country. And I had started to get more involved with my union and started to go to UFT meetings and sat down with my school's UFT chapter chair to have a conversation. And that election was a really eye-opening moment for me. When the results came out, the president won with 92% of the vote. So you would think that would indicate that everybody was aligned, on the same page, headed in the same direction. Well, my colleague and I came across a blog post that at the time I just really couldn't believe wasn't sort of on the cover of the New York Times, because what it was a breakdown of where the votes in that election had actually come from. We saw that nearly 50% of the votes for teachers union president had come from retirees. On top of that, another 25% of the votes had come from out-of-classroom personnel, like payroll secretaries, school security officers, guidance classers. So classroom teachers were literally the minority of who had elected the teachers union leadership in the largest local teachers union, the largest school district in the country. And that surprised me. What surprised me even more, though, was that out of the whole universe of New York City public school teachers that could have voted in that election, only 18% of them did so. So on one hand, I was hearing from my colleagues how incredibly frustrated they were by the conditions of their profession, and yet on the other hand, the channel that was available to them either wasn't operating in the way that it needed to be truly representative, or teachers weren't leveraging that channel. And so we founded E4E on a pretty basic premise, which is that for far too long, teachers have been treated as subjects of change rather than as agents of change, and we set out to flip that dynamic on its head. And so what we do is grounded in two long-term outcomes: the elevation of the quality and prestige of the teaching profession, and of course, better outcomes for our students. And yet we know there are major systems and policies in place that need to shift if we're going to see those two things become a reality. And so, just in short, the way we do that at E4E and what we mean by teacher voice is, first, we're building a movement of forward-thinking, progressive classroom teachers through boots-on-the-ground grassroots organizing, through grassroots networking events, and building a community. Second, we work to identify, train, and support leaders within that broader movement to take on key positions of influence in their schools, their districts, and really importantly, in their teachers' unions. Third, We help teachers create policy recommendations because, as Maddie said before, we think you get much better policy when the people who are supposed to be implementing it have had a hand in creating it on the front end. And then fourth, we help teachers turn their ideas into reality by helping them run teacher-led advocacy campaigns at the district, state, and at times federal levels in order to see change in every place that education policy lives.
Can we pivot to Maddie? Because, I mean, so we heard Sydney was an AFT member, and the governance in NEA is somewhat different. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Because I'm an avowed union goon, and have been since when I was still a teacher leader. I actually developed my voice as a student member of the NEA student program. I was on the NEA board of directors before I ever became a teacher. And I believe that voice is very important, but the problem so much in education is when you're a teacher at the table, as one of my friends said, you're actually just the parsley on the plate. You're there to look good, but they don't really want to hear what you have to say. So teacher voice isn't just about looking good. As Secretary King talked about upstairs earlier, it's about having courageous conversations and even telling your friends they're wrong. So when we talk about teacher voice, I think that a couple things we need to keep in mind is that, first of all, teachers are not monolithic. And so you need varied teacher voices. You know, my friends who are teachers of color say they hate it when somebody turns to them and they're the only person of color in the room, and they say, what do the black people think? Right? It's like they're supposed to think for all of them. And many of the same, it's for teachers. I had a friend of mine the other day who said I was the only teacher on a panel, and everybody turned to me and said, what do teachers think? Well, I can't speak for every teacher. That's why we do need a variety of voices in this, because we do have different perspectives. I can't speak for a one-room schoolhouse teacher in western Nebraska. I'm from Omaha. I can speak about my experiences as a teacher in an urban setting. So we need those variety of voices. I also think that there is a huge counter-narrative going on out there that is trying to tear apart the profession, trying to tear apart what it means to have a free, equitable public education. And we need our 3 or 4 million voices as educators to combat that counter-narrative, because we don't have their billions of dollars. So we're going to need to use our millions of voices to counter that narrative. And the other thing I'm going to say, and again, an avowed union goon. I'm still on the board of directors of the Nebraska State Education Association. There is a fight going on within the unions themselves. And it is a fight about progressive versus conservative unionism. And there are those of us who are continuing to fight that fight inside the union. Because, perfect example, there was a report issued by the NEA a number of years ago called the Commission on Effective Teachers in Teaching. We had this report called Transforming Teaching. And I happened to chair that committee. People were so nervous about what we were going to say. What are they going to say? What are they going to say? We said some things that I didn't think were that crazy, right? That, you know what, there is a difference in teachers. Not every teacher is perfect.
Maddie, they were not that crazy.
I know, they weren't.
Because I think I had to write about that.
Yes, you did. I mean, we said not every teacher is created equal, right? There are some teachers who are better than others. And you know that, and if you're a parent in here, you know that, because you make sure your kid gets in that right classroom, not with that crazy teacher you happen to know. So there's that. And that we as teachers need to be the quality control guardians of our profession. One of the craziest things to me was, as we were doing this report, I mean, many of us really believed in peer assistance and review, but I'd been in the union 20-some years at that point, and I'd always thought that there was things against it. Then I found out, I told the staff, go back and bring me all the language that says we're against it. There wasn't one thing against it in our policies. It was the culture that was against it. And since then, I've heard a quote that says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I would also say that culture eats policy for breakfast. So the unions have to change, but there's voices inside the union that are trying to do that, but we have to be actively involved. We can't have 18% of active teachers voting and expect to change in the union. Can I just be really honest?
Of course.
Okay, it's really hard for me to be here because you TFAer people, I was told for a long time that you guys were like ruining the profession. And then I met some of you, and you're damn good teachers, right? Justin Minkle from Arkansas is a teacher of the year. Chris Poulos from Connecticut is a teacher of the year. Passionate, caring, committed people. But as long as there are others who want to keep us divided and keep our voices divided and keep us fighting each other, and as long as they do that, they win and we lose. So we need to find opportunities to build bridges across our commonalities and not burn them down across our differences, and allow different voices, as long as we're all headed toward the same thing, which was equity and greatness for our kids. then we can take different paths to get there as long as we all agree to get there. And that's why we need so many voices, and now I'll be quiet.
So I have so many reflections on what Sydney and Maddie said, and what you both said actually resonates a ton with me. But one of the biggest pieces is, so I taught for 10 years in LA, in Oakland, and then in the South Bronx. And it wasn't until my school got a new principal, who I really just did not fundamentally agree with. We did not see eye to eye in terms of how kids best learn, that I started thinking about who makes the decisions? How did this person get in this position of power to kind of change the entire direction of our school? And what role do I have in figuring that out and making some change? And I've shared this story with some folks that same principal, maybe because I was a little bit of a rabble rouser at my school, strongly encouraged me to apply for the Teaching Ambassador Fellowship in Washington, D.C. So she was the reason that I actually applied. And I was like, chances are slim, but I'll apply. And it ended up being one of the best years of my life. I learned a ton, and it led me on this different path. But like I said, I was a Teaching Ambassador Fellow at the Department of Ed for those 3 years, and it took us, our little cohort of 5 teachers from across the country who were living and working in Washington, D.C., it took us about 6 months of our 12-month fellowship to get a sense of what the heck was happening in that building, to learn how to talk policy so that our voices could be heard in those conversations. What conversations could we enter? Could we not enter? What rooms were closed off to us because we weren't welcome in there, and what rooms were open? So, and it wasn't until, towards the end of that fellowship that we really felt like we were figuring it out. And at that point, I was ready to go back to the classroom, but got very strongly persuaded to continue some of this work at the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. And so I did that work for 2 years. So I was in the policy world for 3 years. And when this is my second year back in the classroom, I am so completely removed. I feel so completely removed from policy because of the day-to-day demands that are on me as a teacher. And so I think, and I'm even on a national commission on teaching in America's future. I'm the lone teacher representative on that commission with Linda Darling Hammond and Kaya Henderson and the former Secretary of Education, Richard Riley. These, policy people, and I'm the teacher voice on that commission, which I love, but even in that space, I am so removed because the demands, I teach in a high-need school. I teach in one of apparently the lowest performing schools in New York State. I teach in, a tested grade and subject. And the demands on me as an experienced National Board certified teacher in that school, where many of my colleagues are first-year teachers and are learning the craft, the demands on me are that hard and how I feel, so I can understand and see, I'm not saying it's right, but I can see why 18% of teachers voted in that election. Because honestly, one of the things that I think about is, why does teacher voice in education policy and teacher leadership have to exist outside of our profession? Why is it through my union, or why do I have to join Teach Plus or E4E? Why isn't it something that is embedded in the day-to-day of in the day-to-day structure of our profession? So, those are questions that are really coming up for me at my school as I've been in the policy world for those 3 years and am now back in the classroom. It's after the end of the day when I'm exhausted because we've had some traumatic experiences and we're teaching and learning and pushing ourselves to our limits. I still pack up my stuff and sometimes go to a New York Coalition of Radical Educators meeting because I recognize, or a National Board Council of New York City teachers meeting, because I recognize the importance in that, and it feeds me and makes me a better teacher. But it's also hard to do. So if I'm doing that as a veteran, not really a veteran, but in 12 years in, then what is it like for my colleagues who are 2 and 3 years in and are just trying to keep their heads above water? So I want their voices involved in that as well, and just figuring out how do we create a space and a structure where our voices are actually taking our voice and using it to implement, to shift and create policy is actually embedded in the profession in our day-to-day.
So the creation story of Teach Plus hits on a couple of themes here. Our founder, Celine Coggins, was a teacher, a middle school teacher, for several years. She left the profession and went to work for the Commissioner of Education in her state. And she had, I think, a very similar experience to Maddie, the commissioner would ask her every so often, what do teachers think? And her answer was always, why don't you ask a teacher, a current teacher, to your point that she'd been out of the classroom for several years and she felt kind of disconnected. And his answer, unfortunately, was very telling. He said, no way, I don't want to talk to teachers. They complain, they whine, and they tell me everything that's wrong and why the solutions won't work. And that's not a productive conversation. And that's really why she founded Teach Plus, is because she wanted to help teachers to, one, find solutions-oriented teachers and help teach them the language of practice so they could be bilingual in the language of both policy and practice, and have conversations with policymakers in productive, constructive, helpful ways, keeping kids at the center and what's the right thing to do for kids. And so that was really sort of the impetus for starting the organization. To get back to Stephen's question, is it more important to have teachers weigh in at the local, state, or federal level? I would add one more choice there, and I would say union district negotiations, and I would say pick the little bubble that says all of the above. I want to give two really quick examples of why that's the case. And then I'm sure you have many more questions for us. The first example is our teachers in Indianapolis a few years ago. The first fellows session of Teaching Policy Fellows was a group of about 20 teachers who were going to spend time together over the course of 18 months learning about education research, education policy, education advocacy, learning to be bilingual. They always work on a project together, sort of a legacy project. And so they were starting to talk about, okay, what do we want to do together collectively in our community for kids over the next 18 months? It was a very short conversation because every teacher in that room had gotten laid off that day. They'd gotten their pink slip. They were all early career teachers, and thanks to LIFO, they were all out of a job, including a husband-wife team who had a baby on the way. So they said, we want to get rid of LIFO. Teach Plus said, okay, let's think through how to make this happen. And so they spent time over the next year and a half working with district leadership, working with union leadership, and got them to jointly develop a commission to look at this issue, and then got themselves appointed to that commission to look at this issue and make recommendations. And the upshot was they got the layoff process changed. They did not completely eliminate LIFO, but they got performance integrated as a key component, so it was no longer seniority only. A year or two later, the state legislature moved forward based on the results in Indianapolis and did the same thing. So that was a policy change completely driven by a group of teachers who felt like that was a positive development for their kids and for their schools. So that's sort of one end of the spectrum. The federal side, which is where I've spent a lot more time, my biggest beef when I worked on federal policy was that there were not teachers at the table in the conversations, and there were not organizations and sort of mechanisms. My sister's a teacher. I called her all the time. Help, what do teachers think? And it was really hard to get that perspective into the conversations. One of the things former Secretary Arne Duncan always says is, if there's not a place at the table, make a place at the table. And the reason for that is it's not a feel-good thing. It is we have better policy when teachers are part of the policy-making process. Mm-hmm. And a really good example of that is the new ESEA law has some provisions around assessment called the SMART Act that provide funding to districts across the country and states that want to do assessment audits with teachers at the table as part of these committees in the district and in the state that will review all of the current assessments out there, figure out which one, state required, district required, and make recommendations. Which ones do we keep? Which ones are redundant or no longer helpful? And which ones do we get rid of? But that law was when it was being created, the House member who was working on it reached out to Teach Plus and said, hey, I want to get feedback from teachers on this bill before I even introduce it. And so they got to help shape it. They sent 8 pages of feedback, and most of what they sent then was in the bill that was introduced and was then incorporated into this new law. Would there be assessment provisions in the law without these teachers, at the table? Yes. Would they be as good? No. So this is not about a feel-good thing. This is about making good policy for kids.
I want to follow up on something that Genevieve said that really actually rung true from my experience, which is that teaching is a full-time job, and like trying to wrap your hands around all the policy levers is also a full-time job. And I think that, like, for example, my experience with this is like I have to write about teacher evaluation a lot, and sometimes my editor will be like, well, what do teachers think about this? And I try to find out what teachers think about it. And like one day it struck me that like teachers don't have a lot of time to think about these micro changes in teacher evaluation, quite literally until the principal comes with a clipboard into their room. Then they start thinking about teacher evaluation. And so, in the interest of making this also sort of a solutions-oriented discussion, like, what would it look like in a school where you didn't have to, where you could do your teaching job, but there were actually like these avenues for getting the information you needed about policy and also sending your feedback up? Is that a change with how you interact with a principal? Is it a change with how you interact with your union chapter chair? Just like ideally, kind of what would it look like? Is this where teacher leadership, which is a term I kind of don't like because even though I agree with it, I don't think anyone defines it the same way. But like, is that where it comes in? Let's just hear from all of you on this, like briefly.
Well, I think it comes in from differentiated leadership. Weak principals hate teacher leadership, and strong principals know it's crucial to student success. So you have to have that differentiated leadership, and with differentiated leadership can come changes in timing. And let me give you a perfect example. I had a fabulous principal the last 5 years, and she came in and she right away admitted what she was good and bad at. And she's a sports person, so she was great at running down kids who needed to be run down. But she was not good at scheduling and timing because math wasn't her thing. So she handed the schedule to the first grade teacher and the sixth grade teacher, and she said, come up with a better schedule. They got an additional 40 minutes of plan time for every single teacher in the building. Now, teachers know that is gold, right? That is gold. Well, the teachers then said, she then struck a bargain, and she said, okay, take your 40 minutes, but do me a favor, twice a semester, go in and watch each other teach, and just build on each other's practice. And develop your own little community or culture around all of that. And she did that based off of some of the NEA work that we'd done. And so we began to build our own best practices in our building, utilizing the time that was given to us. We didn't spend $10,000 to bring somebody in for a day who would tell us it was great and then leave. We'd never see them again. We did it within our building and within our current working day. One of the things to me, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I will say, when I first started teaching back when God was a baby, we would be done at 3:15, and there was time to get to a committee meeting and have voice and still get home and feed your kids. Well, now my teacher work day starts about 8, and the kids don't walk out the door till 4:05. And so by the time, and then that means I'm not walking out the door till 5:05, and then you're fighting traffic, and you got to get home. That's why Twitter and Pinterest are the biggest drivers right now of teacher professional development, because it's stuff we can do in between doing everything else. I have more webinars at 8 o'clock at night when I'm glad the camera's off so people can't see me in my PJs, but we're getting work done. So I think that we do need to, though, think more proactively about how we're structuring the day. I think some of these teacher-empowered schools, I would actually all of you should look up teacher-empowered schools. It's a new org out there. It's not just teacher-led schools, which we talk a lot about as teacher-led schools, but these are teacher-empowered schools where teachers are entering into collaboration with administration on how should we as a professional collective run our building, and not putting principals up here and teachers down here, but realizing that we're the same professional continuum and how can we work together to make this happen.
The only thing I would add to that is I also think that there also needs to be a bit of a cultural mindset shift amongst the teaching profession where we see our roles a little bit differently. And And we need to see ourselves as advocates for our students, not just inside the four walls of our classroom every day, but also outside of it. And I think if we can reframe the mindset with that, then that will help us guide the way that we embed teacher leadership in the very many forms that it can look like in our school days, in our after-school days, right? And in everything that we do as not just a professional, but also as a person who cares about kids and the profession more broadly.
But we have to acknowledge that's hard, and you're going to get pushback. Because when you push against the immovable mass of the education system, it pushes right back against you.
And that's why we need to do it together.
That's right, and that's why you need to be a member of your union while you do it, because if I
sure.
wasn't a union member, I would have had several principals who would have already fired me. That's just my little 2 bits.
Go ahead.
So I have a quick comment on that too. What I hear from teachers over and over again that they want is hybrid roles where they can keep a foot in the classroom and teach part-time, but where they can also work part-time in a teacher leadership role. Really hard to work that out in the real world right now. Teach Plus is trying to model it. We have a teacher in residence program where we've worked with teachers who are spending some time in the classroom, but also working part-time for Teach Plus. And you know, it's awesome because they are living it every day. But one of the things, so we hear this appetite for this. So one of the things we pulled together about 4,000 teachers around the country during the debate on the new elementary and secondary education law, including some awesome teachers from E4E, from INSTOY, from America Achieves, from Hope Street Group, from all of the teacher voice organizations. And one of the things that these teachers collectively advocated for through a series of days where we brought teachers up to Capitol Hill and met with top senators and House members and their staffers about this was hybrid roles for teachers. And Senator Bennett from Colorado worked with us and Senator Snowe from Maine worked with us to get some language in the new law around teacher leadership that encourages states to use part of their Title II dollars, which goes to every state in the country to the tune of almost $3 billion a year, to use some of that money to build out these hybrid roles. Also to build out some teachers teaching teachers, master teachers, professional development programs, among other things. But there are some really positive teacher leadership provisions that now, over the next year or two, states are going to have to, one, make the decision, and districts make the decision, okay, we've got these dollars coming. Do we use some of this for teacher leadership? Do we use some of this to build out some hybrid roles? Do we use some of this to build out some master teachers teaching their peers PD? And the reality is it's going to happen in some states and it's not going to happen in other states. But there's a huge opportunity for teacher voice and for teacher involvement on the ground to try to get that over the top in as many states and districts as possible over the next few years.
No, I was just going to say, the only, I think, I won't say a ton, I just think a lot about time and my vision, like, you said teaching is a full-time job, and so is policy, it's a full-time job. So I think of Finland, I think of places where you have time to teach kids, and in that same school day before that 3 o'clock bell or whatever time or 4 o'clock, you have time to collaborate with colleagues. You have time to look at student work and actually say, these guys got it, these guys didn't, tomorrow I need to reteach this. I don't know this, so let me go and talk to a colleague down the hall who does it. And so I find time has been the biggest issue, and it's also, I think there is a ton, I want to return to the joy and the why of teaching, right? Like a lot changed in those 3 years I was out. The Common Core standards were rolled out, student test scores were being used in teacher evaluations. So when I got back into the classroom, the climate and the culture of teaching was very different. And because I said, like, I teach in a high-need school, my colleagues who are 20-year veterans, some are, first-year teachers, some are, 15 years in, people are just the joy seems to be gone sometimes. And we know, like, it's about our kids. It's about our kids. It's about building relationships with our kids. It's about seeing where they are and knowing how to push them to get to that next place. It's about them taking their learning and moving it beyond themselves. How do I use what I know to impact my community and make it better? So when we return to that, I feel like that we encourage each other in that sense. And I think we're shifting that way, at least in New York State. For the next 4 years, test scores cannot be used to evaluate me as a teacher and my effectiveness. But I think as a teacher and many of my colleagues, it's kind of up and down all the time, right? And so, if you've been in the profession 20, 25 years like Maddie, you've seen a lot. And so you know some things come, and that will be gone in 4 years.
Sooner or later, it all comes right back around.
Yes, it comes back around, but you know what? If I stay true to what I know as a teacher and my core beliefs, then I'm good.
It does all come back around, and I can say this because my editor puts the issue of Education Week from 25 years ago in the kitchen, like every Monday. And like, I'm not kidding you, like not that long ago. I mean, there's this blaring headline, teaching, the pressure to change is mounting. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like, so like 25 years ago, I mean, it's talking about all the same things. But anyway, I digress. So I'm gonna ask one more question, and this one's actually pegged to something that Maddie was saying earlier. And that is, and I've seen this too in reporting, there's a lot of concern, I think, about the professional status of teaching as reflected by pay, working conditions, respect, popular representations of teachers. There's this new weird, like, I forget what the name of it is, but like, I mean, literally when you watch programming about teachers, it's like out of Victorian melodrama. Either you're like bad teacher, you work in the merit pay system, or you're Aaron Gruel and a freedom writer. I mean, like there's like nothing in the middle there, right? Like, so we have this very peripatetic kind of like image of teachers. I think, and then I think this is manifesting itself in the decline in people who are going into our teaching programs, which is something we've written a lot about. I think it comes up in this discussion about retaining teachers, and it's just that it is a really hard job with a lot of demands. And so the question I want to pose to you is, what are concrete things that policymakers can do to address this, and what are concrete things that teachers, including the people in this room, can do to help address that?
Okay, so this thing's twisted, it's driving me crazy. I'm not OCD, but okay. All right, but it keeps spinning. All right, so I really believe that we're on the precipice of major change in what it means to be an educator in the education profession, and the choice we have to make is, do we make choices that allow us to develop an airbag to cushion our fall when it falls apart, or do we make the harder choices that allow us to jump on a plane and take us to where we want to become? And I think we have to make the hard choices. And we're not the first ones to have done this. There's this great quote from this book where this father tells his son that, I don't want you to go into this profession. It's awful. It has nothing to do with science or anything. Why are you doing it? And when I ask teachers where did it come from, they're all like, it's teaching. And I'm like, no, it's actually medicine 120 years ago. Because 120 years ago, the reason barber poles had red and white stripes was because the barber was your medicine guy, right? So he cut your hair and put leeches on you. Oh, that's a good combo. So, but because they realized people were graduating from schools of medicine that were illiterate, they realized they had to deal with the schools of medicine. And so this report came out called the Flexner Report, and it was a real indictment against the medical profession, and they closed half of the colleges of education in the country. Can we deal with the fact, and this is one of the things that, so I hear people say all the time, well, TFA teachers are great and other teachers are great and yada, yada. The problem is none of us are great enough for our kids right now, because I don't think that the training you get as a TFA core member is enough, but I don't think the training that people are getting in college is good enough either. And the fact that you're doing well as them isn't that you're getting it great. I'm sorry, you're both getting crap, all right? And that's just the reality of it. Colleges of education have become they are the cash cow for the university system, so nobody's willing to take that on and really embed teaching into the profession the way it needs to be, so that we break down that wall between the practice and the preparation for the profession. So I think we need to, that's a place to start, and I think we as the Department of Ed, and Genevieve, you'll identify it's hard to say we when you're in the Department of Ed sometimes, but why haven't they issued yet their report on teacher ed? right? They've been talking about issuing that report now for how long? And it's still not coming out, a couple of years. And I think part of it's because it's gonna be for colleges of ed what NCLB was for K-12 teacher. Because we have to take this on and realize the problems that are going on there. So I think that's one of the big things we need to do. We need to look at residency programs. We need to really embed. And then we have to take on what it means to be a teacher as far as pay goes. We got to get rid of the steps and salary, the steps and lanes kind of thing. Can we just admit that it's broken, it doesn't work? 26 years, I'm still not at the top of my salary schedule. Took me 17 years to get a master's degree because I didn't make enough money to pay the tuition, and since I couldn't pay the tuition, I couldn't go ahead and increase my salary. I mean, we know that there are different and better ways to pay people, but we're going to have to take on the difficult challenges of doing that, and part of that is in recognizing that there are different levels of competency within our profession. And we don't help that when we say, every teacher is wonderful. You know what? I love you all, but you're not all wonderful. And some of us can get, we can all get better, but we need to take on the role of quality control guardian of our own profession to either help people get better or help them get out. And we need to enter into relationships with policymakers to get that done by being actively involved in the decisions around who is a teacher. So you need to have in your contract, you need to bargain how people come into the profession and how they exit a profession. I'll stop, I'm almost there. There are three things that define what a profession is. Those three things are that it has a defined body of knowledge. Number two, it trains everybody in the profession on that body of knowledge, and it controls who comes in and out. We don't have any of that in education. The defined body of knowledge, what you learn, is dependent on where you get your training. It's not dependent on what's best. We don't share best practices, and in fact, when they're shared, too often they're sold. I mean, no surgeon at one place to another makes you charge to learn how to take out an appendix better. Now, granted, they'll charge you for the materials, but we don't share enough. And three, we don't control who comes in and out. And there is a role for us, but that means teachers have to be willing to admit, I love you, but you should no longer be teaching next door to me. Because I wouldn't put my kid in your classroom, so why am I going to put somebody else's kid in your classroom? And those are really uncomfortable conversations to have, and they're uncomfortable conversations for us to have with policymakers as well as our colleagues, but we have to have them.
I just want to add here, by the way, that Ed Week did a year and a half ago, tried to look at what the rates were for closing education schools. And I mean, literally, it was like 0.2% or something nationally. I mean, and it's extremely, extremely political. I mean, we found in New York, you may be interested in this. I mean, like a panel of the Board of Regents found 8 schools that they said, I mean, really, you should not be preparing teachers. Every single one of those decisions overturned. Every single one. And not to let the alternatives off the hook, because they're usually held to a different set of standards altogether. So, I mean, try making sense of that. Anyway, sorry. End of soapbox, and turning over to Genevieve.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to just give 4 quick things that we can do, but I want to say, sharing what you just shared, Maddie, around our defined, I'm loving your Ron Thorpe-ism today on the panel, which makes me really happy. But thinking about, I think as a profession, we do have a defined body of knowledge. It's just not one that is shared with all of us as teachers, and those are the National Board Professional Teaching Standards, which are created by teachers, for teachers, and with teachers, and have been around for more than 25 years. And so it's how do we take those standards and actually share them and embed them across our profession. So I wanted to just say that. But I wanted to say for policymakers, something that I feel like policymakers, what is key to the work that they are doing, you mentioned, Jonathan, I think other folks mentioned that, sorry, Stephen, I was thinking of Jonathan. Sure. Okay, Stephen, that, I was thinking about Jonathan.
I've been called far worse.
Yeah, sorry. That many policymakers either have never been teachers or have not been in the classroom for a long time. And when you step out of the classroom, you forget a lot. I forgot a ton those 3 years I was out, which is why last year felt like my first year of teaching all over again. It was my hardest year ever. So one of the things that I think policymakers can do and should be expected to do is to be in schools at least 4 times a year. Like policymakers should be, if you are in any level at the policy world, you should be shadowing teachers and principals at least 4 times a year, and students at least 4 times a year. So when I was a teaching ambassador fellow, we did something for Teacher Appreciation Week. One of the assistant secretaries called us in and said, what do you guys think we should do to show teachers that we really appreciate them? This is from the U.S. Department of Education, and we said, well, one of the best things you can do is actually hear us and walk in our shoes. So we created something called Ed Goes Back to School, where policymakers from the U.S. Department of Education, assistant secretaries, career staff, people from offices around the different offices around the country shadowed teachers for a day. And then we all came back to the department and had a debrief with Secretary Duncan. What did you learn? What changes would you make knowing what you know now? What was it like for you as a teacher to have this person in your classroom all day? And one of the things that I still think about it, someone who would later become an assistant secretary of education stood up with tears in his eyes. He had shadowed a high school theater teacher at Ballou Senior High School here in DC, and he was with her, period 1 theater, and he said, and Ballou was a turnaround school, and he said, we are holding her accountable for her kids' success, yet only 7 of the 26 kids on her roster were there that period. How can we hold her accountable when her kids are not there? What are we doing to ensure that kids are getting to school? What is preventing those 19 students from getting to school? For us as teachers, that's common sense, like in your face, obvious, but for someone who is not in that role and doesn't see that every day, it's very powerful. So I think policymakers need to be shadowing students, teachers, and principals at least 4 times a year to impact the work that they're doing. The second thing I'll say for policymakers is pay matters. And this sounds so silly, but so I teach in a high-need school. There's something in New York State called Teachers for Tomorrow Schools. It's a spinoff of, or something, not a spinoff, but a part of Race to the Top. And if I just found this out randomly, so that's also funny when you think about communication with teachers, but I got a $3,400 bonus this year because I teach in a hard-to-staff school and in New York City, and I was effective or highly effective on our metric. So I can get that money for up to 4 years. So I can get, close to $14,000 or more than that for those 4 years. When I've been reflecting on that a ton, I was like, that is going to allow me to go to Hawaii next week to do some R&R, which is self-care is incredibly important for teachers. That's so true. But that is something that feels so small. I've been reflecting on that a lot. Like that, I would not maybe have been available. It wouldn't have been available for me to take that trip. So I think about small things like that, which makes me think of the disconnect between policy at the national level and how it actually impacts teachers. I'm like, wow, Race to the Top impacted me. I'm going to Hawaii. So that's, it's obviously way more than that. It's impacted me in many other ways. But the thing I'll say for us as teachers is, I learned when I was at the Department of Ed that many folks, because we don't get to see teachers and engage with teachers that much, Alice was saying she calls her sister, who's a teacher. What do you think about this? Many policymakers and people who are not in schools rely heavily on social media to hear what teachers are thinking. Twitter, blogs, anything that you are doing to put your voice out there in the social media world. So I'm not huge on social media, but I'm on Twitter, Genevieve DuBose. I tweet one thing a day that I'm grateful for in my profession, like something that impacted me that day with my students. And I started a blog after I left the Department of Ed to kind of say, I've been gone for 3 years. Let me chronicle what it's like to be back in the classroom at this time. I've had people say to me, oh, I read your blog. I'm like, oh, wow. Or they come to me and they'll say, oh, I remember you talked about this. And I'm like, I've never met you. And then they'll say, I read your blog. So I think as teachers, we can put our voices out there because people that we don't even know are listening are actually listening.
Yeah. So what you both said resonates very much with me. I think if we're going to truly transform and elevate the teaching profession, it must be a combination of both major systemic policy shifts to what it means to be a teacher and what the teaching profession looks like on everything from how we recruit teachers, train them, support them, develop them, evaluate them, retain them, compensate them, promote them, et cetera. And it also needs to be those small day-to-day moments. So your question sort of gave me a little bit of a sweat because it took me back to a moment that I had in my first year of teaching that I think for me really highlighted this challenge that we have around the professional status of teachers and how we acknowledge and reward great work. My first year teaching, I taught in a really big school. There were 2,000 students and 200 teachers, and we still had one principal. And every day he would come around and poke his head into each classroom and say, "How are things going?" And before I could sort of respond, he was on to the next classroom. But I was sort of left every day with here's the man who's responsible for the teaching and learning that's happening in this school. He hired me, and I have no idea if he thinks that I am doing an awesome job or if he thinks that I need to go. And at the end of the year, this was maybe 1 month out from the close of the school year, I was picking up my mail in the office, and there was an envelope addressed to me, to Miss Morris from my principal. And I went back to my classroom and I opened it up, and this was the first, letter that I had gotten from him in the whole year. And I read it, and it was this really lovely, thoughtful note. And it told me how much he valued having me there as a teacher, what he had seen going on in my classroom, how important it was, for me to be on staff and the kind of culture we were trying to create in the building. And I was on cloud 9. And you probably know this because you've taught in a New York City public school, but a lot of them are quite vertical. And so I took this letter and I ran up 6 flights of stairs, as fast as I possibly could, to another teacher's classroom in the building. And I wanted to show this because none of us knew how our principal felt about us. And I walked in, I busted open the door after school, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I got this amazing note. He really likes me. He wants me to stay next year." Well, my colleague opens a drawer in his desk. He pulls out a similar-looking envelope. He pulls out a similar-looking letter. And the note was almost word for word identical. And just as quickly as I had sort of been put up on cloud 9, that balloon had popped, and I just felt so deflated as a professional. And so I think about the combination of the big things that we need to do, as well as the very little things that could happen in our schools on a daily basis to let teachers know, hey, what you're doing is important. Here's where you're doing well. Here's where you can be doing better. Here's where we're going to support you. And hey, we really need you here. Can you stick with us for another year? There's a great report by TNTP called The Irreplaceables that looks exactly at that, and it shows that something as simple as a principal going to a teacher and saying, hey, you're doing a great job, will you stay another year, increases the retention of teachers in huge ways. So I think we need this combination of big and day-to-day. And I would also just say one more thing, which is built on what you said about your Twitter account. We also need to be responsible for changing the narrative about what it means to be a teacher for folks who are not teachers. So that means when you are, out having drinks on the weekend and you're at a bar and somebody asks you what you do and you say, oh, I'm a teacher, and they say, oh, that's so nice of you. You're such a good person. Wow, I couldn't do that. You can say, thank you, I appreciate that. And you can also give them some real line of sight into what it means to be a teacher, the incredible skill that it was required to be a teacher, the kinds of strategic thinking that is required to be a teacher, the kinds of incredibly challenging decisions that you make by the hundreds on a day-to-day basis. Teaching is a noble profession, and we should acknowledge that. And it is also a highly skilled profession, and we should never let anybody forget that.
Amen.
Amen.
So I'll make this really quick because I think we're getting close to time. One thing I can't resist adding. I helped work on the Race to the Top law. Awesome. I did not realize we were going to be sending teachers to Hawaii. Okay.
It matters. Self-care matters.
Self-care matters. And you know what?
Serious.
Part of, I will say in all seriousness, I've heard from a lot of teachers who were on the fence great teachers, about whether or not to stay in the profession, who have gotten bonuses through the new evaluation systems, teachers in DC, teachers in Memphis. And I think that we are helping keep more fantastic teachers in the classroom, and that was very much part of the goal. So if self-care helps with that, I'm all for it. The other thing I wanted to say is just to be real here for a minute. Policymakers, no matter how brilliant, teachers are, most of them are not going to come to you. I wish that were not the case, but the reality is they are bombarded every day with more requests than they can possibly accept for their time, for their attention, for their energy, for their brain power. And the squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say. And so, you have to step up, and I would really encourage everyone here. They will come when there's organizations. There's policymakers that will go to the union. There's policymakers now that come to Teach Plus, that I know come to E4E. And so, take a look around and figure out, how you want to plug in to organizations that are trying to find ways for teachers to speak collectively and have collective impact that really can be exponential. So that's my parting thought. I do want to say one thing about Teach Plus. Our teachers are all high performing. They all teach in high poverty schools, and our focus is on early career teachers in years 3 through 10 in the classroom. And I have some handouts and annual reports that say more. But find a way to plug in, and policymakers, once they start hearing from teachers who are solutions-oriented and productive, they absolutely change their tune. And I will say that Commissioner of Education, who I talked about earlier, who didn't want to listen to teachers, is now a very proud board member of one of the teacher voice organizations, and has completely changed his tune after hearing from teachers who've been helpful in the policies he was working on.
I just want to give you a resource. Rick Hess has written a really good book called The Cage Busting Teacher, and at the back of that book is an appendix of lots of teacher organizations, teacher advocacy organizations, and the fellowships that they offer and how you can access that. It's also just a really great chronicle of the stories of many of these teachers and how they did what they did. So I think it'd be a good resource for you. Cage Busting Teacher.
So I initially wanted to do like 20 minutes of lightning round, and this has been such a rich conversation that we actually used up 19 of those minutes. So we have 1 minute for lightning round. So this is not just going to be lightning round, it's going to be like electric slide, like tornado lightning round. We are going to still do it, and then we're going to leave 20 minutes for your questions. So start thinking about what you want to ask, and the microphone is sort of in the middle of the room. And we hope that you will all come up with good questions. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to give you a topic, and I want less than 10 words on it. Okay? Ready?
Will really encapsulate the nuance of all of these
Exactly.
issues,
But
I'm
fortunately,
sure.
since you can Google all of us and find all of us, you can follow up. So first question, test scores and teacher evaluation, good, bad?
Say that again. What were they doing?
Test scores and teacher evaluation, good, bad?
Suck.
Good or bad? Can I say?
Alice is thinking I cannot possibly do this in fewer than 10 words. Yes.
Both. I've seen examples where it's been good, and I've seen examples where it's been bad.
8 words, multiple measures that authentically capture what we do.
A quote from a teacher, Matt Greenwalt in New York. Teacher evaluation is an incredible opportunity to strengthen the teaching profession, not just by providing opportunities to develop our weaknesses, but also to highlight the strength of every teacher.
Good job, guys. Okay, one more. 2 things every teacher preparation program absolutely must, no question, have.
1 year full-time teacher residency.
Amen to that, and really hard standards to get in.
Yep.
Echo on the residency, hard standards to get out, and real conversations around race, ethnicity, cultural diversity.
Amen.
ditto to all of that.
See, that worked so well. Yay. All right, so at this point, I really do want to turn this over to you. And everyone, please converge on the microphones.
Hi, my name is Adia Hogue. I'm a fourth generation public school teacher and union member. And Maddie, you are my sister from another mister. I love you. A lot of you talked about time. I mean, time honestly seemed to be the theme of the panel. Time to collaborate with colleagues, time to observe other teachers, time to plan, time to reflect, time to teach. Not one of you said more time to test, which thank you for that. My question really goes back to hybrid roles. Alice, I believe you kind of started that conversation. Thank you. In Baltimore, we've started that. We came away from steps and columns. We do pathways and intervals. You can move your pay scale within the school year. We have teacher leadership roles that allow you to stay in the classroom. And I feel like Baltimore, and shout out for like anybody here from Baltimore, anybody, right? Baltimore gets a lot of crap. And we're doing a lot of things right, and no one's paying any attention. So I want to challenge you, Alice, and the rest of you who are thinking about hybrid roles in education, to look at what Baltimore Teachers Union specifically and the Baltimore school system is doing right.
Actually, I have a whole day of visits set up with the Baltimore Public Schools on Thursday.
I would love to go with you.
So that and they were set up by the BTU so that I can
work
amplify
for the
what's going
BTU.
on.
I would love to go with you and show you around. I have amazing schools filled with amazing teachers who are doing amazing things every day in the classroom.
Yep, I'm going to spend all day there on Thursday.
I will tweet you.
Okay. Tweet me.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a Idaho Charter Corps member. We're a new corps that just started this year. The question I have for you, we talk about time. Where I'm teaching, we're talking about money. Half the teachers at my school have a second job just to live.
Yeah.
They don't have time. And the kind of conversations that we're having here today, they don't happen in our classrooms, they don't happen on our teams, they don't happen in our buildings, and they don't happen in our district. Idaho is very far removed from even the idea of what teaching could look like. What is your advice to try to show people there as an outsider, because I'm not from Idaho? What is your advice to show people the possibility of what teaching could be, of what pay could be, and of what has to happen to get to that place?
Well, I think it's what Genevieve is doing. I mean, it's you gotta carve the right. Time is tough, right? But what's important, we put our time towards. And so I think carving out some time to start blogging and just talking to people about what's out there that's good. Connect to an ESET. There are some good ESETs going on in Idaho. The elevating.
What's an ESET?
Thank you. Elevating and celebrating effective teachers in teaching. It's a Gates-funded thing, but all they do is they give them the money and then they say, go forth and make a great day for teachers. And there's some of those going on in Idaho. I mean, you have to help people light their spark that will get them excited in this, and those are just a couple ways I can think of to do that.
To the specific question about what pay could be, I give a lot of credit to DC Public Schools, where teachers now can make, I think it's about $120,000 a year, teaching in a high-poverty school and teaching well in that school. And I know teachers in that system that absolutely would not still be here had the pay not gone up so dramatically, and it is, I think it is keeping great teachers in the classroom. Interesting story related to that. I live in a school district outside DC where the typical teacher makes about $55,000 a year. They just cut pay for teachers in challenged schools midway through the school year. Another story, but a number of the teachers are leaving. And one of the districts they're looking at closely is coming to DCPS. And I think ultimately, it's going to take a while, but I think one of the things that will happen over time in our school district is that it will have to raise salaries a little bit more. Yeah, market adjustment, because of the leadership that DCPS has shown. So I'd say, show examples like that, look at the numbers. If you dig around online, you can find them, and let's, race to the top for compensation too.
I just want to add, so the federal government, and Alice mentioned that, spends $2.5 billion with a B annually on professional development, and I'm willing to bet practically nobody in this room has heard of that, because the districts get the money and they decide what to do with it. I think it's criminal that teachers are not like talking about how that money should be spent, because even though, in small districts, it, works out to be not that much, $10,000-$20,000, that's enough to rent and equip a conference room for you and your teachers to be working together a certain number of hours a week, so.
And we actually have people, we've had a number of teachers who come to Teach to Lead who said, we want to take over professional development in our district. And they come in with the idea and they leave with a fully formed action plan as to how they're going to go about doing that, and they're going home and they're doing it. So look up Teach to Lead on the website and get teachers excited about being a part of the solution, and we'll help you do that.
I want to just add one thing, which is I think when you are new to a community or just you're new to the profession as well, so much depends on relationships, especially when time is crucial. So thinking about relationships with colleagues, what relationships, even if it's me, and this was true for me, I was at a new school last year, talking to colleagues around, hey, can I come in and just watch you, for like a period or 15 minutes so I can learn a little bit because I'm thinking about this. That has, and from an authentic place of learning, that has allowed me to then build those relationships with certain people, where this year we're actually starting to have some of those conversations about how can we shift things in our school. It may take time, but I feel like those relationships are key to then creating some of that sustainable change.
I would just say, you're talking about really big, meaty, important issues, right, that I can imagine might seem sort of like far off. How do you create change on that, given the limited time and the focus on what you need to do? All of our work at E4E is actually grounded in how do we help support and train teacher leaders to organize at the school level so that this can be embedded in the day-to-day. So we work to help build teacher teams in schools of people who focus on policy, advocacy, organizing their colleagues on specific issues. And so together, you can come together with your colleagues, right, in your school building and say, hey, what if we took 10 minutes at the end of the day and phone banked and we all called our city council members, right? So think about what are those things that you can do that are, limited time but could be really high impact. And, at E4E, we'd be happy to share more about what that looks like and help share out some of those tools and supports so that you can do that wherever you are.
That would be great. Thank you.
Good morning. How are you guys doing? Is it good morning, y'all? Sorry.
No,
You are-
only in Nebraska,
Still in
not here.
Texas time. Okay. I'm a proud educator in Dallas, Texas, through and teaching science. And this is my second year, really just trying to get an understanding of what is actually going on around me. But I do have a quick question in reference to the union, becoming a part and building partnerships with the union or the teacher unions. Initially, coming into the situation, a lot of the veteran teachers were just telling me, oh, it's good to be a part of the union, especially when something bad happens. You have somebody to have your back, and then you turn around and you kind of you read certain things to where the school's not really educating you about the union. It's more like a hush-hush situation because maybe they don't necessarily have a very healthy relationship between the two. So as a teacher, a millennial teacher who would love to create some type of partnership or build a bridge between the classroom, the union, and the school, to not necessarily be in a relationship like I only need you if something happens bad at my school, but to actually be able to provide some insight, to be able to share the joys of our profession, to be able to be that advocate of change, not only for our classroom, but for the people who are actually growing in that particular community. And I just wanted to know, how can I, with the 5 minutes that I do have to breathe, how can I actually be a part of that, and how can I actually initiate that relationship
Totally.
with my classroom?
I think you just hit on one of perhaps the biggest myths that exists in educational change, which is this idea that if you are pro-reform or pro-change on a lot of these issues we've been talking about today, that must mean that you are then anti-union. when in fact we know that the exact opposite is true. We know this from national polling of teachers, and we know this from talking with thousands of teachers across the country, that in fact the vast majority of teachers are pro-union and pro-change at the same time. And yet the way that we need to make sure that others see our unions as the critical levers for change that they are is by actively participating within our union to ensure that it is truly representative of the diverse voices that exist within the teaching profession.
Absolutely. So I would literally call the local union president and say, this is who I am. I want to be involved. Here's what I care about. Where can you plug me in? Because when I was union president in my local, I was looking for you. But in a place like Dallas, I'm not going to find you. And so you need to be proactive and reach out to them. I would also say, look, like within the NEA, we have a lot of different caucuses that have a lot of different things that they care about. There's a special ed caucus. There's, every ethnicity has a caucus. There's the English teachers and a yada yada, but there's still members of the NEA, but then they push their agenda and their issues through the union itself. So I would check that out too.
Yeah, and you know what I would also say right now is like such a great time to be engaging in this conversation. There is actually a Supreme Court case that is just heard oral arguments a couple of weeks ago and is going to be heard by the justices this year. It's called the Friedrichs versus CTA case. It is grounded in a freedom of speech argument, but really at the core of this case is a question around the future of unions' ability to help teachers organize and collectively bargain. At E4E, we took a loud and proud stance a couple of weeks ago on this topic after polling over 1,000 teachers across the country who stood with their unions on this case. And we held a telephone town hall with Randy Weingart, the president of the American Federations of Teachers, to make sure that teachers knew about this case. Because what we found is that actually a lot of us don't know the details about this case and aren't able to talk about it, and it could have a huge impact on the future of unions and the future of teachers' ability to collectively organize. So I would say look into that and think about, how can you talk to your colleagues about the importance of getting involved with their unions, and yet also use this moment as a time to push our unions to think a little bit differently about how they actively engage their members and ensure that they're truly representative and taking on the kinds of, tough conversations and courageous conversations that they need to have to really make sure that that the profession moves into the kind of place that I think we all collectively want to see it go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is John Harris III. I'm the founder of an organization called Authentic Reflection, where we promote identity development and leadership through artistic reflective processes. We use the motto see you, be you, do more to facilitate all of our projects, programming, and advising. It's to really see yourself for who you are, be that person, and with that understanding of self, do as much as you can to improve the world. And so I joined the teaching profession when I was about 16 as an actual profession, but I began when I was 14 as a volunteer. And I got my first contract partnership when I was 18, led my first program when I was 18. And what I've found is that over all of these years, I think teachers spend too much time in the classroom because a lot of times teachers are unable to relate on a very personal level with the issues that are going on in their classrooms as it relates to what it means to achieve from the perspective of the student, because they're trained from the perspective of the education institution on what achievement is supposed to be. So then they're trained to believe what they think in their mind is bridging an achievement gap that isn't something that resonates with the students they're supposed to be teaching. So I think that policy work in the education sphere should focus a lot more on economic policy than it does, because you can't really develop communities and say that you're generally educating the minds, a holistic development of the students, if you're not preparing them to achieve in the world that they live in. So I used to teach job club business education at Maya Angelou Public Charter School. I taught all the 7th graders, all the 8th graders. On 7th graders on Tuesdays, 8th graders on Thursdays, curriculum that I developed. And then the other days of the week, I will do outreach work, and I was able to bring in partners for the businesses that we started in each classroom so they can see what it will be like to implement the programs that they said they wanted in their own communities. And it wasn't very difficult. The only difference between what I was able to do and what the other teachers was able to do is that I was able to go out into the community. And over this past year, it's been a lot similar, where I've been floating to a lot of different schools in different states, contracting, sometimes in the classroom, sometimes in policy, advocating for increases in economic opportunities, including Twitter conversations with African American Educational Excellence and Secretary Arnie Duncan. And what we found is that we need more economic empowering programs, especially for community groups, returning citizens and things of that sort. So I want to know, what role do you believe that education leaders can play in economic policy to empower these disadvantaged communities that we're always sending in people to save, when really they just need help collaborating and organizing the resources to save themselves?
I'd love to respond to that. I'm responding to you with a story because I think back to what is the purpose of education? Why do anybody who's teaching in this room now or was previously a teacher, why did we enter the profession? And for all of us, it's different, right? For me personally, it is because I grew up in a system, LA Unified Schools, where there were clear divisions in terms of what was accessible to certain students versus others. And why me, as an African-American girl, was one of 2 African-American students in my AP class, for instance, when 40% of my high school was African-American. So thinking about all of that, I think one thing that you shared, that you said that resonates with me, is this notion that what do our kids want out of schooling? They're mandated to go to school. So what are we doing as educators to make it most relevant for them and most applicable for them? And I teach at a school where we call our students scholar activists. That is our founding principle. He believes in being a scholar, but also being an activist. And last year, my students wrote a grant for, they received $2,500 from Citizens Committee for New York, which is a community-based foundation that says exactly what you said. People who are in communities know what is best, so you don't have to be a 501c3 to get this funding. If you're a group of community members who want to solve something in your community, you can apply for this funding. And my kids wanted to reduce the amount of rats and trash in the Hunts Point and Longwood section of the Bronx, because many of them walk past, were assaulted by rats on our way to school. Some of them are living with rats in their homes. There's a ton of environmental racism that's happening, high asthma rates in our community. And so thinking about how do they connect to what they're learning? So when we're growing as readers, writers, listeners, and speakers in our classroom, how is that going to impact people beyond us? And so I think I resonate very, very strongly with what you shared, and thinking, for me, it comes back to what is the purpose of education? And because we are not monolithic as teachers, so that looks very different for different folks. But how do we, in our teacher ed programs, make sure that people who are going into the profession to oftentimes teach students who do not look like them, or maybe don't come from similar backgrounds, to actually be engaged in their learning?
There's a lot of wisdom in your story and in your question, and so I just want to say thank you for your leadership. To your point that, interesting point about teachers spending maybe too much time in the classroom, and what can policymakers do? There is international data showing that teachers in many other countries spend less time, have a reduced workload compared to teachers in the U.S. And I think that does free up time to engage in the community and connect with their peers, among many other things, that is having a positive impact in those systems in other countries. So I think policymakers in the U.S. Really love to talk to each other and look internally. And I think as a country, our leaders need to do a much better job looking around the world and looking for good examples of best practices in other countries like that, and then figure out how do we apply that. And I hope that the Teach for All movement can be a catalyst in helping some of those conversations happen.
We're almost out of time, so we're going to take one more question, but I'm going to be here after the session, and I think a lot of the panelists will be too, so please come up after.
Hello, my name's Erin. I was part of the DC region here, and now I teach at one of the KIPP schools here in DC. And I'm a pre-K teacher, so I get them like their first years. And I'm a big believer in the fact that early childhood can be the make or break in terms of a child's perspective in education for the next 15 years of their life. And so very passionate about it. It's also been in the news a lot lately, especially Barney Duncan. He took large incentive with early childhood. So I'm also just very curious because I'm very passionate about the early childhood policy. What kind of work and involvement all of you have with that?
Yeah. We had a group of teachers, we have a chapter in Minnesota, and a group of E-Free Minnesota teachers worked in coalition with a number of parent and partner organizations on a campaign that we called Mini Minds. And we collaborated to effectively get the state legislature to include a provision to increase funding to create 9,000 new pre-K seats, and tied it to measures of quality to make sure that they were high quality seats.
So I started in early childhood. I mean, I was a first grade teacher, but even in college, my work study was at the daycare center where I learned how to redirect, which really helped me in my later years. But I also, the department is very, very, very much interested in early childhood because of exactly what you said. And one of the things we're doing is we're currently working with the National Head Start Association to actually have a special Teach to Lead conference just for early childhood educators, because often they're left out of the conversation when we talk K-12. And so we want to focus on them specifically. I think it's their conference in Nashville in May.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So thanks everybody for coming, and I just want to say, personally, thank you for giving me the privilege of writing about you at Ed Week, and I guess let's just applaud our panelists and then everyone in the room.